Hey, groupers, Pastor Marshall, ready to dig into Psalm 139. We looked at Psalm 156 a couple of weeks ago. David said that we had to get vertical thinking, get off of the horizontal thinking, and that this vertical thinking, it would transform us. And so that's what we're doing. And so we're spending 2 weeks just immersing ourselves in two Psalms that are just all about the character, the nature of God, this vertical thinking. And so we looked at Psalm 103 this last week, and we looked at God's attributes. We focused on them, especially the attribute of forgiveness. And this week we'll talk about Psalm 139. And this is one of the deepest Psalms, one of the richest Psalms. This is a great one-stop shop for who is God, what is He like. And so I want to just get you talking a little bit about how God is beyond us by talking about things in our lives, our everyday lives that are beyond us. So just a very simple question. This is just an icebreaker. This just gets you talking. What are some things that you have pondered that you know very little about? Like, how does your TV work? Or how does your car work? Or right now, if you're streaming this from YouTube on Wi-Fi, how does that work? And just what have you thought about at times that you don't really understand much about how it works at all? Let's resist the temptation to be know-it-alls, and let's just share some things that we don't completely understand. We're certainly glad that they are real. And that's where we put the category of God. We certainly are never going to understand Him completely. We are finite. He is infinite. But we are certainly glad that He is real. And so David sings about God and His amazing attributes. And so we divide this psalm up into 4 sections, and each section has 6 verses. In the first 6 verses, David talks about God's ability to know it all. We call that His omniscience. So He knows every thought, every word that we ever speak or think. Do you believe that that is true? Do you believe that God knows every thought, every word before you speak it or think it? Do you believe that you can hide anything from God? Is there anything inside of your heart that you think that you can hide from God? Maybe no one else knows, only you know. Do you think that God knows it too? If God knows every word before we speak it, is He responsible for the words that we speak? What is the difference between God's knowing and God's creating? That's really what I want you to talk about. Was there ever a specific moment in your life when you became very aware that God knew everything about you, that He knew all of your thoughts, that He knew all of your feelings, that He knew every word that you were about to speak? Was there ever a moment that you can remember where you had this epiphany? If you can remember when that was, share it with your group. If you can remember what feelings came over you when that happened, share it with your group. And then finally, still just talking about His omniscience, if we spent every single day entirely aware of God's knowledge of us, what in our lives would change? Well, then the next 6 verses, David wants to focus on God's ability to be everywhere at once. Big 10-penny word is He is omnipresent. Tell about a time that you experienced some kind of deep loss, or you went through some kind of intense suffering. And if somebody on the outside was watching and you told them that you believed in God, they might say to you, well, I don't see how you could have gone through that if that would have happened if God was real. But you would say, no, during that terrible time, I felt like God was holding my hand. Just tell about that if you've had that kind of story. In verse 10, David implies that God is holding our hands. What do you think about the idea of God holding your hand? How does that comfort you? And then in the next 6 verses, David is going to talk about God's ability to be all-powerful. And again, the big fancy word is omnipotent. And so we usually talk about planets and galaxies and suns and moons when we talk about God's creative power. But David gives us an image of a prenatal situation. Here in David's story, we're inside of a woman's body while a baby is being created. What is it about a prenatal situation that reveals the power of God? Why do you think that David does this? And then, if you have ever seen an ultrasound or felt a baby kick, how did that moment reveal the wonderful power of God to you? Well, then finally, there's this last little 6 verses where David talks about sinful man. How does sinful man compare to an all-knowing, everywhere, all-powerful God? I just want you just to make a list. Is there anything in this last little section about man that relates to God, parallels itself with God? And if there's not, what are the differences in these last 6 verses between man and God? Well, just a quick little reminder about our application. I'm just challenging you to acknowledge God's all-knowing, God's everywhere, and God's all-powerful nature this week. I'm just asking you to meditate on those things. Fill your mind thinking about the things of God. I hope that you have a great group, and I look forward to seeing you very soon for the next psalm. God bless.